which I'm going to start now. So that recording, we'll say this again at the end, but we have started a Google file of all of these resources and links in their applicable sections in that file. And as always, please keep yourself muted until you're ready to speak to help with background noise. So I think that's it on the housekeeping. Let's see if this is going to let me advance. There we go. So quick introduction. Like I said, that we'll try to keep the general we'll try to keep the discussion portion until about, I have that time, starting at 10:35. There we go. Sort of more geared towards these public programs and events. And then the end, we'll either continue with that conversation or switch gears to whatever content we want to talk about. So I am going to hand it over to Allison to start that discussion.
Thanks, Dylan. All right, so we've got some great discussion questions to start us off today. So I thought I'd read the first one and get us going. This is something we've been thinking a lot about at the Ackland this summer, as we've had to, well, I guess it's almost summer. This spring and summer, as we've had to switch from in-person programs to virtual. So to start us, what lessons have you learned from creating virtual content so far, and how do you plan to continue this programming? Does anyone want to jump right in?
I'm happy to start if
Great.
No one else wants to go. I'm Zach. I'm the guest relations coordinator at Morehead Planetarium. And I know some of the stuff we've been doing is a program called Morehead at Home, which involves taking either some of our pre-rendered planetarium programs, or we have some live presentations on Tuesdays and Thursdays that uses a thing called SkyScan. That's like a planetarium dome on your computer screen. Obviously not quite as good as the real thing. But I'd say, at least as far as it's just harder things we've learned, it's harder to bring, obviously, as many people in. And I think also you're combating people who just getting tired of their screens. So trying to draw as much attendance as possible with those is tough. But I know some of our educators, or all of them, have done a really great job. I know some of them have been more heavily involved in that than I have. But as far as how we're charging for the content, we're doing it for free right now, as I understand. I know Richard Watt is also on this call with me, and I don't know, he's our reservations manager, and he might be able to speak more towards what direction the pricing conversation might be going. But yeah, that's the main thing that we've been working on right now.
Great. And do you know, are you already planning for fall with the same sorts of virtual things in mind?
Those discussions are happening right now.
Right.
I mean, because at least for us, a big portion of the guests who come through the building are students on field trips. And that looks like it might not be something that's going to be happening in the fall. So we're starting to look at virtual options in a way that maybe, we can do something along the lines of a virtual field trip experience.
Mm-hmm. I know our education department's thinking about the same, since field trips I know they're on the CDC list of do not have.
Yeah.
For the fall. So I know, yeah, the art museum crowds are thinking about the same questions.
Yeah, lots of groups of kids packed together closely from different schools is probably about the opposite of what you want.
Yes. Great. Anyone else thinking about lessons they've learned from spring virtual programs and how to take that into the fall?
So I can jump in. This is Jana from the Botanical Garden. So we have been doing, we haven't done many paid events at this point. We're starting to migrate our events that are typically in person to an online format, and like testing out a lunchbox talk series. And we're also taking a lot of time to collect data before we put a lot of effort into virtual events, because what we found is putting on virtual events takes way more time to produce than doing an in-person event. We did just have our gala, which I know I talked about last Thursday in our meetup for those of you who could make it. And we've had a really successful turnout with raising money. So the event itself was free. Normally it's a paid ticketed event with like, you know, food and dancing and music. But by having it free online, we definitely reached more people than we typically do. And we've been seeing, like, we're still kind of getting an idea of the money. And since our costs were a lot lower, we might actually bring in more money this year. So we found that like going the suggested donation route seems to be received well. We haven't tried a ticketed event yet online, but we'll see about kind of exploring into that territory soon. I don't know if any of y'all participated. There was like a national survey that went out by Slover and Linnett. They're like the consulting group, and they were trying to understand the significance of cultural institutions during a time of crisis. And they surveyed like hundreds of thousands of people, and the survey, we're waiting to get the results back across the nation, but we did get the survey results back from our group, and I know other people participated. I think maybe Carolina Performing Arts and a few others participated as well, but we were able to get back some data from what people want to see. And so that has been really important, looking at that data. And we're also sending out a survey after this virtual gala to see what kind of programs people want to see. And we're also trying to understand, would they pay a ticketed online event, or would they rather do a suggested donation? So we're trying to kind of get more information before we put out more, because it's so much work. And once we get like the national survey results, I'm happy to share those out in the Google Drive, because a lot of the metrics they're measuring are like, what kind of things do you want to see offered during this time, and what are you currently participating in? And of those activities, like online classes or podcasts or live performances, which ones do you rate the highest? And so it's just like, and I think the survey itself had 175,000 respondents across the country. So it's really good data to have. And one of the things that is like my biggest takeaway from just our results with the garden is the thing people are missing the most is connection with one another. So we're really trying to think, how can we provide a virtual event that provides connection, and it's not just one way? I think people are tired of like getting fed things. So how can we like really encourage community building during this time? And it might mean smaller events or breakout rooms or some sort of interaction where it's two-way. So those have been some takeaways. So sorry we don't have too much like actual experience, but a lot of data at this point.
That's great, and I'm so glad you would be willing to share that in the drive, because I think all of us would love to see how that turns out.
I could definitely share the garden data, which has about 180 respondents. I can share that spreadsheet, but the bigger data is coming out the end of June. So I can share both of those. And you know, the garden one might not apply to everyone else, but the other is going to be kind of more holistic. So I can share both.
That'd be great.
If you don't mind, if I could dovetail into what Jana was just talking about, this is Evelyn from the Gregg Museum. We have been coordinating with our orientation program on campus at NC State, and have 5 small events coming up in June and July, which would have normally been a tour of the museum that people could take while they're taking the orientation of the entire campus. So we're going to be really interested to see how that is responded to. The other thing that we're doing is limiting the number of people on purpose through an Eventbrite registration, simply because we have one person managing the virtual tour on a Zoom call, much like this. And my experience with those kinds of events is if you get too many people, it's just crazy to try to manage it. We are a free museum, so we can't really speak to anything about monetizing our virtual events. We're actually not allowed to do that. But I did want to mention that most of the events that we're looking at are going to be smaller. They're going to have to be.
Mm-hmm. We've noticed the same. We've done, well, Lindsay, my colleague in public programs, is on this Zoom too, so she could speak to more details also, but we've done some online talks and some online kids art making programs. And for the talks, we've it's been okay to make it more one way. We've done it as a webinar versus a Zoom meeting, but with the kids programs, we've definitely already seen that smaller is better because they're designed to be interactive. And with the first test museum tours, I guess you could say that we've done, definitely smaller is good for a live interactive program, which it fits our mission, so it's not a problem. But since I think like Jana and Zach were saying, like it's so much work to do online programs, it's definitely a consideration, because the smaller you cap things, then potentially the more you might have to or want to do, and that's a lot of effort, we've noticed. Anyone else have comments, things they've learned from virtual experiments so far this spring?
I can follow up on what you were talking about, Allison. I think for me personally, like having one person kind of running the chat like Dylan is, and the other person being like the content leader. So for our art making classes that Allison was just talking about, we definitely already decreased the number of households that we allowed to register, because kind of sharing out and talking about what you're making is so important to our in-person class. So we wanted to make sure to keep that element going forward. And then with the pricing, typically it's free for members, and then $5 for non-members. And it is a program where we tend to see more non-members than members. So we felt it important going online to offer an option of 0 or 5. Just to see what would happen. And it stayed pretty consistent. About half have chosen to register at no cost, and half have been willing to pay the $5 for the 45-minute art making session. In person, it's normally an hour and a half. So that was also something we were conscious of when we were designing the program, by removing the ability to be in person. That might affect people's willingness to pay.
Yeah, I think it's been sort of a pleasant, I guess, enough surprise that people have, in the pay what you wish model, have chosen to help support the class. Because there are, even with the virtual program, there are very real costs. We pay an art instructor, the same one who would have done it in person, to be there, although people get their own materials in this case, for the online one. So yeah. Others that are thinking about virtual lessons learned?
What numbers are you, I know I should know this because I work with y'all, but what numbers are you seeing work really well for those classes where there is the interaction back and forth? Has there been like a sweet spot of 6 participants, 12 participants, anything like that?
So we started with 20 for our first class, and it was very crowded, and obviously with the kids wanting to unmute themselves and talk to each other, and the instructor. We're trying 15 for this Saturday. I think the lowest we would go is 12. That was our normal in-person capacity based on the art making space that we had at the museum on campus. So probably no lower than 12, but 12 to 15 is what we're thinking at. And then I think for the virtual tour that one of our colleagues kind of toyed with, it was maybe between 10 and 15 also.
Mm-hmm. And then for the webinars, for Art for Lunch, sort of the speakers interact, and then the participants chat or use the Q&A in the webinar function. We have been getting way better numbers than we would in person. In person, it's more like, I don't know, it could be like 20 to 40 in our in-gallery program space. And then online, we've had more like 100 to 150. And then maybe that many again watching the recording on YouTube. So it's like shockingly well attended. But we haven't done those since sort of like beginning of quarantine times. So I don't know, because it's sort of a program tied to the academic year with faculty speakers. So we don't know that momentum would stick around, but we're gonna try and ramp it back up later in the summer and as the academic year goes. So we'll see. Others? One question I have, although I'm happy to jump back to the starter question. When I'm thinking about virtual programs, I want to know, or I'm trying to think about how our virtual programs might interact with a in-person visit for the museum when the museum eventually reopens. So like if visitors are able to come to the galleries but not gather in groups, we'll still be doing virtual programs. But how do we make sure that people know about online content? Do we want to make sure that they can access it in the galleries? Does that mean changing the length? Does it mean new signage that we hadn't previously considered? Does it mean pre-recording things that would normally have taken place like many months into an exhibition? So those are a lot of the questions that are on my mind. As I mean, we're not there yet, as we all talked about last week for the reopening general discussions. We're not there yet with the date or even anything like that in mind for the museum, but when I know that eventually we will have an open museum. So how will the virtual content interact with that is a question that's on my mind. So I wondered if any of you all are thinking about that. Not yet.
Well, oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, carry on.
Carrie from the Museum of Natural Sciences. So we made the decision to make all of our fall events virtual. So we have our biggest one is Bug Fest, and it's in September. And typically we get about 30,000 people on site. And so we're going to make it a week-long virtual event instead. And so, you know, obviously it's really sad to not get to do Bug Fest, but it's also, you know, kind of, you know, we have unlimited, really, speaker potential globally, whereas we could never afford to bring certain speakers, you know, to on site. So, but our hope is that when we do have Bug Fest again, that we will be able to continue some of this virtual programming, like whether it be us, you know, really intentionally live streaming our presentations or, you know, recording them, or just having maybe do a combo where people can interact from all over and still have that, you know, we found that the chat function is like making it interactive is what people really like, and being able to ask questions. So, you know, so can we do that, you know, have that chat up like during a live program so that people who are not on site can still have that interactive element. So that's about as far as we've thought about integrating the two.
Mm-hmm. And for that switch, we're thinking about that too, especially since we've now seen that we can get more people at a talk in virtually than we can in person. Like physically, we can't accommodate 150 people in any of our spaces for a sit-down talk. So are you thinking that you'd need like new staff, new equipment? How do you manage that combined formats thing?
Yeah, so I think it would require a staff person to, in addition to the host, you know, on site, like, you know, doing audience Q&A, you would have a whole person sitting there monitoring the chat and feeding those questions into the live program. Mm-hmm. And as far as equipment, I don't think that we would really need additional equipment unless I just don't know what it, I may just not know what it is.
Yeah, because we don't have, we do audio recordings of some of our actually just educational stuff for our own educators, our own docents, but we don't regularly audio or video record our live public programs, but now we may want to. So that's equipment and humans that we don't have to either shoot the video or edit the video, you know, like there are all these things that we hadn't had in place. So that's a huge consideration as people say, oh, we'll just do both.
Yeah, no, I think you have to be thoughtful about it in order for it to work. So.
Exactly.
The Greg is actually talking about that too, and our struggle is, as you note, Allison, staff. Who's going to do it? When are they going to be able to be there? And we're very small compared to the amount of programming that we do. So even with our virtual tours, we were able to do the first few because we happen to have the photography available already. We want to continue that practice because it seems to be very successful. And the question, of course, is coming up. Okay, when in the exhibition installation process is that going to happen? Somebody's got to come in physically and do it. And so for us, the conversation is circling around how many resources are we going to need? How many resources do we already have? What makes the most sense? And we're still working our way through it. It's confusing. I'll tell you that.
Right. It's very different, I think, we can't just set up a Zoom chat, like face someone's laptop at a whole gallery with a live speaker on the other side of the room. It's really different. So, and we are not currently set up for that here. Have others found good or thinking about good solutions? I see that Jana's asking about recommendations for equipment. Does anyone already have stuff in place that's working for them to combine or to bring live programs to online audiences?
I don't personally know that stuff, but there's people at the museum who do. And so Jana, I can just connect you with those people if you'd like.
Thanks, Carrie.
You're welcome.
I know for, again, I'm on the event side, but I know when we were talking about things like gallery openings, which are usually big cocktail parties for us and still something we wanted to make a celebration, we were discussing hybrid options. So, which would have an in-person component. And I had basically suggested that anything that was sort of live, like the remarks at a normal event, that they would be live streamed. But then that the other content, like a virtual tour of a new exhibition, things like that would be pre-recorded. So I was starting to toy with the idea of live plus pre-recorded plus on-site in person, since we have discovered that none of those things are probably going to happen due to many factors. But I think that the live and pre-recorded would hopefully help with some of that interaction component. But I had no idea how to do that. I mean, I was literally envisioning someone standing there, like our communications person standing there, live streaming from their cell phone, which was the best option I had come up with. But I also understood that that was not a good option. So we hadn't gotten past that.
I have, so I just became involved. That was why I was late to this meeting. I was meeting about that. So we're doing a program at the museum. And so we're doing it on Facebook, and it's our eco station is Prairie Ridge. So they're doing a program. So every Monday they show a video, and it has to do with citizen science. And so they show a video from like 12 to 25 minutes long about whatever the topic it is they're highlighting that week. And they post that on Monday. Then on Friday, they have a live Q&A with scientists or experts in that. So people watch the video, maybe dabble in it throughout the week, see if that, and then they come back on Friday to talk about it. And so that, I feel like that's kind of doing that hybrid of the live recorded thing that I don't know if that would help, but I think it's a really fun topic. I mean, a fun way to do things.
And they're recording that from inside the museum?
So they do it out there. It's an outside recording because these are the eco station. It's outdoors. Actually, we're not allowed really in the building right now. So, yes. But with permission, we can be outside. So yeah, so it'll be like one person holding the iPhone and on the other person who's like doing the video, and then have the scientists, just Zoom. It's I don't know. I'm actually not sure how that's going to work, but I would assume it's a Zoom on Friday.
Cool. Yeah. And we have some upcoming programs for a virtual festival that we're about to attempt a week from Friday. And it's a mix of a couple of the performers are performing live through Zoom using the webinar functionality. So they'll perform and then do Q&A to follow, or do sort of like Q&A throughout, once more of a workshop. And then the middle performance is a musical performance, and it's 75 minutes long, so they really want to pre-record it so they can stop and start and get us a final product. But what we've decided to do is to do it as a YouTube premiere. So you won't be able to view the video until it premieres on our Ackland YouTube account. And then we've invited the performing artists who are now available for Q&A because they're not performing live, to log in and chat with viewers sort of live as it happens. So that's a nice pre-recorded and live hybrid, I think, but nothing to do with the museum, and we're relying entirely on the technology. I mean, the content has to do with the museum, but they're not in the museum. Oh, my kids are here. Anyway, yeah, I think that's a nice thing that we're experimenting with next week. So we'll see how that goes, and it'll be hopefully nice and interactive.
With all the talk about potentially doing these hybrid events, has anyone talked about staffing and how that's going to work? Potentially with budget implications too, knowing that most likely everyone's going to be pushed back on how many hours and things like that, just out of curiosity.
We actually have, because one of the folks that is involved in creating some of our virtual content is actually part-time. So that's tricky. I think part of it too is it's going to depend on what the landscape looks like for us moving forward as a museum. Right now, we don't know what that looks like. We don't have dates that we can publish for opening future exhibitions, for example. So the question of bandwidth has come up, because there are individuals involved in those projects right now that when we resume what I would call normal operations, may not have that bandwidth anymore. And we are not in a position to hire anybody. In fact, we may be losing some people, we're not sure. So yeah, that's tricky.
Yes, bandwidth it comes up at least once a meeting, in every meeting for us. I don't know why, if it's just like because it's new, but yeah, live. I remember the virtual programs take a lot more time. On the program side, it takes a lot of time for our communications colleagues to edit things and determine where they should go online and when. And yeah, we also have a hiring freeze, so we're not thinking about ways that we could invite new staff to join us. It's more like where are our limits, finding out where the limits are, and making smart decisions for the fall. Actually, for the summer at this point. We're already pushing them, I think. What about, go ahead.
For our virtual event that we just did, our gala, there was involvement from a lot of different departments like horticulture and our development office, and events we also help support in addition to education. So I actually think by having a lot of people involved early on, it kind of helps share the knowledge of how to work these systems, and the hope is that like we can move towards a model where I think we do like public events that are outreach oriented, that like events supports, and then the education can focus more on their programs. So I think the model we're taking is we're kind of like a small and scrappy team. So we're trying to get a few hands involved and not putting it all on one team. Not sure if that's a good one, but for a staff of 40 full-time employees, I think that's the approach we have to take. It's too much on like the communications department to do it all. So I think we're all contributing to like the content, and they are focusing more on the editing and the branding, but I think if we all kind of pitch in, it's more manageable.
Right. Yeah, I think we're taking a similar approach at the Ackland. We have a newly convened digital working group that's sort of cross-departmental, where everyone contributes content stuff. But the sort of the behind-the-scenes program logistics, like setting up meetings and webinars and calendars and registrations, is something we're still figuring out the best balanced workload for everyone, and definitely editing and adding captions and things like that to video content is something that it's quickly getting to the point where it's like, how many more of us need to learn how to do this? Because it's getting to be too much for the folks that already do know how. So it's something that we're thinking about a lot.
and it's tricky when you have more people doing the same thing, because then it might be like this, the quality differs between the things. So it's really hard to figure that out. Yeah.
Yes. Is anyone close enough in their reopening the physical institution plans to think about how virtual programs might be, I guess, consumed by visitors to the physical space? Or is it just something you're thinking about posting to the normal platforms like your email, newsletter, or your social media accounts and websites? Are QR codes coming back up in your discussions like they are in ours?
I think so when we open, we're going to we're not going to be doing any on-site programming, and you know, and most of us are programmers, and so I think we're going to keep our digital programming going, and the space, you know, our space will be, you know, open for people to come into. So we may, I think we're gonna, if, you know, we open when the governor goes into phase 3. So if that happens, then we open. And so, but I think we're gonna just try having the building open first and then see how that goes, and then add some, you know, safe programming once we kind of see how that goes. But in the meantime, like I think we're going to continue all of our digital projects.
I think the Greg too is in the same boat, because we are also a state institution. We're going to have to follow the state of North Carolina's guidelines on top of the university's guidelines. However, we have already been discussing how to make the space accessible. QR codes have come up, timed admission has come up. You know, it's a whole new world out there right now. So we're struggling a little bit with what makes the most sense and how to make it accessible, and accessible in lots of different ways, not just from a safety standpoint, but we don't want to scare people. We don't want to make these huge pronouncements as they walk in the door that you must do this and you must do that. We want to make it a welcoming experience, and hopefully focus on the fact that we're just trying to keep them safe while giving them access to the museum. And that's sort of what we're battling with right now. In fact, that's what I'm working on today, partly. So I would say, yeah, I got nothing. Sorry.
We all share your sentiments, I think, here. So much, it's an entirely new world, like you said. Let's see. Well, I think we have a little bit more time for discussion, so maybe let's think if we can shift a little bit to the collaboration question that we have up here about how we can collaborate and share content. This is something that, I mean, I think we're all sort of just working away and love to collaborate when we can, and a lot of us have before in person, but we've started thinking about like whether digital projects, they should theoretically be easier to collaborate on. Like we've been saying, people don't need to travel to your space. So that's something to consider. We have no parking lot, so that's always a consideration that makes us feel happy if it's easier for people to get to us. So have you all started to think about ideas for how we can collaborate locally on programs, or collaborate with institutions maybe in your more specific networks across the country? And what does that start to look like? Not ready yet.
No, I mean, we have had conversations about people actually using our grounds. If you've ever been to the Greg, we have a lovely garden out and back. But that's not really virtual. I mean, there are other organizations. We're part of Arts NC State, so all the performance groups are really, really struggling because they are not going to be able to do much of anything for a long time. And there has been some discussion about what other spaces are available to them that might be able to be safer instead of a theater. But as far as collaborating virtually, no, it hasn't come up yet. I'm sure it will.
Em here from the Museum of Life and Science. Thanks for having me, by the way. We sent out a survey and kind of an appreciation message to our community partners that partner with us and the vendors that partner with us at the after hours events. And we just kind of wanted to get a sense for what they're feeling, and give them the opportunity to let us know how we can help them in the future, understanding that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But and we also provided them with a list of our potential event topics and let them select and tell us which ones they would be interested in helping us with, and also providing what would make it hard for them to do. And we're now kind of going back over all that information to try and rebuild and look at potentially doing virtual events with them. So I highly recommend that. I think that was a one-stop shop for getting all the information we needed, and updating email addresses and getting contact information too.
That's great. Yeah.
I think I'm really like, I guess when I hear the word collaborate, I'm like, ooh, what are you doing that I can steal? So I guess I would really love to hear what people are doing and see if I can steal it. And then I sent out my email to my BugFest exhibitor saying, hey, listen, it's going to be virtual. What ideas do you have on something we could do during this week-long festival? And I've just had the most incredible responses from people with really creative things. And I love it. Like, it's really exciting. Like, one artist said she'll paint a painting for the event and do, and like take pictures of her progress. So we can do like the time lapse thing, and then she would donate it and we could use it to like raffle for something. And so I thought, so I'm like, oh, what a great way for one of our artists to be involved, in this science event. So of course I'm thinking, oh, I'm just going to have all these scientists talking all day, but I really wanted to mix it up with a lot of different programming. So we've had folks, with workshops and DIY crafts that people can do at home. And so just like a really great mixture of programming, but I'm always looking for more ideas. So if you guys, I'm happy to share the ideas that I have, and I would love to hear your ideas too.
That's great.
I'm also thinking about like, this is like really big picture thinking, but what if we had like a passport to learning where like all of the organizations we're a part of, if there was some sort of thing where we just, people can go to different parts of the triangle and learn, whether it's in person or virtual, kind of like get stickers for events they participate in to try to like leverage all the work that we're doing. Because I think when I think about like sustainable systems, I think some of it is just elevating what's already out there. So that could be cool to put something together like that that's like promoting the work that we're all doing. Just a thought.
Well, one thing I can offer actually is we tried that at NC State. There were 4 organizations that were involved, the GREG, the Arboretum, and I'm blanking on the other 2 right now. And it was that exact model where we had sort of a multi-layer invitation. It was a members only event in our case, but I could see that being expanded and developed so that all the organizations, especially those state-run, but maybe everybody, as you suggest, have some kind of stamp process or sign-in process, or I don't know, so you can keep track of your visitors. But I think it's a great idea because our members loved it. We had, as I say, 4 small groups come through and they really enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it might be easier to do within our own institutions, like state-run or like UNC or Duke. It might be easier that way than across the board, because I'm also seeing a lot of other organizations that are probably like, I want to get on this, and it's already like out there. So I'm not sure if that would be a little easier to make it like a little bit more localized, but I don't know.
Yeah, done something like that with students for the orientation, like the back to school week. We call it Week of Welcome at UNC. And we've done it with the other arts orgs. And we actually had a little like passport card that you could get stamped, you know, in the olden days with in-person programs. And I think students liked it. They got a prize at the end if they completed enough of the, the visits on that one sort of open house day. So that would be really cool, I think, to do virtually. And it's kind of related to, we used to have like way back, like a decade or more ago, it used to be that members of the Ackland would also get, they would be like ticket holders to a music department series, like tickets, you would get free access to a different music department series if you were a member at a certain level, or, you know, tickets to Carolina Performing Arts if you were a member at a certain level. So I love, it's sort of like in that same vein, and that I think members would recognize too, as a, like, you're supporting all of the different organizations in your network that you would be going to anyway. So it'd be nice, then we would by default have to cross promote, which is always good, and could even find thematic similarities if there are between, you know, the art on view, the you know, plants in bloom, the bugs available to learn about, all sorts of things.
But then there's the bandwidth, right? I'm like,
Yeah, who's going to make our passport? Can we ask our communications colleagues to add it to their plates? Don't let them see this. Yes. Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. But if it is that what we're doing is committing to doing maybe fewer, better programs of our own and highlighting the work of colleagues across the triangle, theoretically, we could come to everyone's working just at their correct bandwidth solution with time.
One way that I have discussed kind of working with other partners in the community is people who are open and how we can leverage the fact that they are open. And so one thing that we had discussed and implemented to some extent, there's a brewery nearby that we do an arts and drafts. We did one before we got shut down. It was intended to be a long running program. But the brewery that we partnered with for that, they are currently open for pickup. And so I know we need coloring book pages. And so I know that at some point, like one of our communications team members dropped a stack of coloring book pages off and started sort of like rolling them into the beer cases that were being picked up, sort of like a arts and drafts sort of activity. But we'd also talked about, again, we're not there, we're more involved in how we're getting our virtual content up, but something that we had discussed was we could continue to do arts and drafts virtually if we made packets of the materials for the art project, brought them to the brewery, and then the participants picked up, you know, their case of beer and their bag of supplies. So that was a way we were thinking of leveraging a community partner that was open without us having to be open ourselves.
I have a question. I don't know if anybody knows this, but this is something that we were thinking about doing, but we have a question, of course. Doing like that sort of idea, but because we have summer camp, normal summer camp for kiddos with our innovation and learning department, and they create, you know, kits that people can come and pick up. If we were to create a kit, is anyone familiar with the ABC laws? And if we sold those kits on our site, if we would need a permit to do that, or do you have any resources other than just calling ABC?
I would suggest, yes, there would be permitting and problems with that. So it would actually probably be easier to do it the other way and sell it on their website under their permit. Like, just because the bureaucratic ways that ABC, I spend a lot of time reading about ABC law because of what I do in my job. So yes, it would probably be easier to do it the other way around. But then also something that's an important consideration is just people who don't want the alcohol component. So I may actually suggest just personally that it's something that you market together as a package. That way you can market on your website and the brewery or whomever's website as well, but ultimately sell them as separate line items.
We've seen a few examples of that maybe at the Asheville Art Museum. Lindsay will remember better, where they had a partner. Sorry, I can't control the phone ringing behind me. I met my kids and I go to my mom's house for morning mommy or Grammy daycare. Anyway, at the Asheville Art Museum, they did sort of a do-it-yourself virtual art making program, and just had a suggested partner brewery in town where it was, order your beer from this brewery to pick up or deliver whatever brewery handled all the sales, and then order art supplies and attend our virtual artist-led program. Oh, thanks, Lindsay. There's that craft beer trivia night. Oh, right, it was trivia, not art making. So yeah, I think Dylan probably is on the right track of, like, if you can keep it separate and still have everyone make money and have attention drawn to themselves and get the program done, I think that'd probably be the easier way. If there's an easy partner that's still in business and selling food and drinks, if that's something you're interested in.
Yeah, I'll just add a few more details if you are interested in virtual trivia or have been doing it. One thing I really liked about this Asheville art program is in between each round, instead of playing music or whatever, we actually went to different artist studios. We talked to the can designer from Burial. We watched a glass blowing demonstration. So just quick 7-minute sections in between rounds, but I thought that was really impactful and just really nice to kind of bring in that community aspect, even though we were all in front of our computer screens.
And were those breakout rooms, or just everyone that was there watched the same different demos and visits?
So everyone watched the same at once. Yeah.
Cool.
So it was just set up in a meeting format, and they did have, I think, of a back of house team, probably of about 3, working with like the screen sharing, managing the chat, all that stuff. So it definitely looked labor intensive, but it was cool. It was fun meeting the can designer. Yeah, if there's a recording out there, I would definitely share it.
And I've also seen where people will sell the ingredients minus the alcohol and then give a supplies list to the people going, like, this is going to require vodka or gin or a certain beer. And so that could also help bypass some of those ABC laws, because I know even that's a little tricky. Like, I ordered some alcohol from a restaurant, and this was in Ohio, but you had to have a certain number of people per drink. So like, you couldn't buy more than 2 drinks per person. So when we went and picked it up, luckily there were 3 of us there, and we had ordered 6 drinks. And he was like, oh, it's lucky you brought 2 extra people, because otherwise I couldn't have given it to you. So that's something else to consider as well.
That's interesting. Yeah, I would love to. I know, Dylan, maybe you were exploring with various catering companies or other restaurants the idea of like having a meal option that you could order for delivery or pickup to go with either a virtual event or program. So that's something else that I think would be really neat, besides beers to deliver, cocktail making, or recipes. We were thinking about having special. We've done this Artini event in years past that we're not planning to do virtual, as far as I know. That's up to Dylan. But Lindsay and I were thinking about whether that sort of art-inspired cocktail thing could be added on to existing online programs. If we do sort of like a date night, is something we were thinking about planning. Have not yet gotten into the thinking too far into that stage, but have seen some great examples out there at other museums.
Well, and kind of what we were mentioning about, we're all so strapped so thin with bandwidth, but people like anyone in food and beverage now probably has a little more time. So if we were, I mean, I love the idea of adding a cocktail component onto a discussion about a piece of art. I mean, the first thing I would do is call up my, favorite local bartender and say, hey, will you record this and send it to me? So same thing, it's a cool thing to add content wise, although people are very into this now. And I will admit, I think that the craft cocktail at home may have been played out already because people really jumped on that. But yeah, same thing. It's not something, I would not be the one trying to invent the cocktail or the idea or anything. The first thing I would do is ask my community partner, is this something you'd be interested in and can you handle it? So then all I'm doing is handling the editing side, which we know I'm really bad at. So that would be my communication team. Yes, and I know if anyone's interested in hearing more about that community dinner thing, we have not done one. I really want to do one, but it's really not a priority right now. But I know some people have executed them well. So if it's something you're interested in knowing how it went, I can connect you to the right people who have done that. Basically, a caterer delivers a full meal and a bottle of wine. Everybody jumps on Zoom and there's sort of like a full run of show via Zoom. But yes, we're not making up excuses to do extra work like this right now.
Not yet. No. Other collaboration ideas that you all have thought about? Now I'm going to be hunting through our collection for all of our bug-themed art. What other things are people planning for fall that we can do related? All right. Are there other things? I know that Dylan, you said we might want to go to more open discussion of just things that people are thinking about in the public programs realm that we haven't touched on. Are there other things that, while we have all of our great colleagues here, that we should discuss or you want to discuss?
How are some of the other folks on the call dealing with renting out the space? The Greg got into that for a little bit and then we lost the coordinator position. The person actually left the job, the position's still there. And of course now we're like, ooh, we can't really do any of this, can we? And I kid you not, 2 days before we went into phase 1, I had an inquiry about a wedding. It was fascinating. And I thought, really? And I politely declined and said, well, sorry, museum's not actually open to the public at this point, so we can't accommodate you. But I mean, it's going to come up because we already have some of our event colleagues asking when we're going to resume that practice. And of course, we can't answer that right now.
I was going to say, I'm happy to take it, but Lauren, you're actively trying to open up. So you want to take that one?
Yes. Am I off mute? Okay. Sorry. I clicked a button on my computer and now I don't know where everyone went. So we are, everything is kind of basing off of our regular reopening plan that's going to be determined by the organization in general. But my team is currently looking at if we open at the beginning of phase 3 as a museum, planning for July 1, we are probably going to be looking at hosting private rentals starting August 1st. I've proposed we have an entire team at the Museum of Life and Science who basically their sole job is to look at every single piece of how the museum operates. And if we're going to be able to implement certain changes, things like that, and then different recommendations that they would suggest. So my team is looking at August 1st, hosting birthday parties with a maximum of 30 people in a very large space. Programs will all be changing. to accommodate for social distancing recommendations, things like that. And then also starting August 1st, we would host small event rentals up to a maximum of 35 people. That changing in about 2 weeks after that first set to have a maximum of 50 people. And then within a month, moving up to allowing larger gatherings, again, all depending on what the governor says and what our restrictions are as far as government plus state. So the Museum of Life and Science is in Durham, and so we have been a little bit more reserved on our restrictions as well. So it's possible that everything kind of just gets pushed back, but basically that first month, taking things very slowly. And then the second month and beyond, just trying to work with our clients to accommodate them. We already have people with 150-person weddings scheduled for this September, and just trying to find a way that we can work within the restrictions of the government and the city, or the state and city governments, but also keeping in mind that we're trying to provide our clients with a good space. So that probably doesn't answer your question as much, but we are at this point accepting bookings past August 1st. But we are also being very careful with those clients to make sure that they understand that if the museum is closed or the state does not allow it, we will not be able to host their event, and we will move it free of charge for them. So our challenges come in with the contracting phase of how do you word that, things like that. But more than likely for the first month that the museum will be open, or potentially longer, we will not have any type of private event rentals. Just trying to figure out how the museum will operate on its own daily operations, and potentially with on-person summer camps too, or on-site summer camps.
Oh, go ahead, Dylan, if you want to. Okay, that sounds, you're so brave. I feel like, so we are also committed to just a fall of virtual public programs. And so like thinking about on-site groups is not something I'm like mentally prepared to do. But it's good to have a plan. And I guess we will have to make one eventually. Although our space indoors can only accommodate, I mean, if people are 6 feet apart, our indoor program and event space can only accommodate about 25 people, including the staff and guards and program presenters. And that would be if people stood in a perfect 5x5 grid, which humans tend not to. So even when we get to places where maybe the governor would allow us to have up to 50-person gatherings, there aren't very many places that we could do it. We'd have to split rooms, and I don't know how. Anyway, that's something that's very far down the line in my mind.
It's definitely probably a blessing and a curse. I mean, we are a fairly large organization, and we are private, so we have a little bit more flexibility there. But the challenge being, I mean, I manage our entire private events team, and so Emily, she does all of our public fundraising events. So there's a little bit of challenge there in trying to figure out exactly how do we operate within this larger organization as well. So trying to figure out, I don't decide the capacity limits. Somebody on our facilities or our VP of exhibits decides all of that. So we're trying to just bridge that gap between our clients and the organization as a whole, while trying to figure out how to operate for them as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's the challenge for us too, because we have been using, just in our internal planning, sort of a 25% benchmark of the allowed capacity in our galleries. And for example, one of the galleries is quite a bit smaller than the others. And so the discussions have led us to think, well, if there's not an exhibition in there, is there anything else that we can do in that space? Would it make sense, for example, to put conversation areas and that kind of thing. And then you start thinking, well, except that you're going to have to put the chairs 6 feet apart. So how's that going to work? We are considering showing films in one of our galleries because it's actually equipped to do that. And again, are you going to put seating in there? If you put seating in there, how do you space it? We also use our lobby very often in the past for events and private rentals and that sort of thing. Well, the capacity for that space is 125 people normally. 25% of that is not a lot of people. And so I think we're really having to wrap our brains around what all of this is going to look like for a long time to come. We're anticipating that this kind of restriction might be in place for a year or two. So what do you do with your programming? What do you do with your events? It's frustrating for all of us, I think, because we don't have specific dates available to us yet, and very difficult to plan anything. So.
Right. Yeah. I think we're in the same boat here. There's so much to, and there's so many things that are out of our control, either whether it's another area of staff or a bigger parent organization or state that we have to get in line with. Okay, but I think, hi kids. Dylan, I think we have to wrap up. Yep, she's nodding. But I know that we have so many more questions and things to talk about. Oh, here's my 1-year-old. So I know that there are probably more opportunities for us to all get together. Did you want to say a little bit about maybe next meetings that are coming up and when we can all start to dive into these scary, even more detailed logistics?
Yes. So, like I said, it took me a long time, guys, but I managed to beat YouTube editor. So those videos from previous sessions are up. We will send out another heads up about where those links are living, and we'll get this recording up as well. I know at the end of the event planning, more private event planning session, we basically said we'd love to touch base again in a few weeks, couple months, to talk again. So it really comes down to what you all as a group want. Lauren and I are happy to continue to schedule these and host these now that we've done it. It doesn't take much time. So we don't have any pending upcoming sessions. But if you all have a topic you want to talk about, or you think it's time again to touch base on things we've already discussed, just shoot us an email, and we are more than happy to set that up for the group. So I think, yes, we're a little bit over time, so that concludes our discussion for the day. Per usual, I will hang out for a couple of minutes in case anyone has anything specific. And then just let us know if there's anything else we can host in the future. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dylan and Lauren.